just to give us terminology and framework in which to operate with our members as they engage into discipleship, right?
Yeah.
And it's not anything new or brilliant or unique, but it's really just clarity and helping to help get language to it, that we're all speaking from the same language and the same understanding. And so that's the ideal today. When I began the process, I think the first thing I wanted to make sure our discipleship pathway was connected to our vision as a church, right?
It's really good.
Our vision as a church is to lift the city and the world by generously giving the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, as I spent time and really went out into the people and began to ask and inquire and have conversations, there seemed to be a variety of what that means, a variety of answers to that. What is our vision? Like how do you actually live that out? And so for me, it really it came down to two words, right? When we talk about the gospel, what is it you're talking about? Most people immediately translate that into going out and presenting a gospel presentation to somebody to come to Christ. It's part of it. It's not the reality of the totality of it, right? And so we need to simplify and get clear on when we say gospel, what are we talking about? And then the other sticking point was, what did it mean to lift? Yeah. What is the lift part of that, right? Is the lift that I go and share the gospel in the hopes that they get lifted? Or is there more to it than that? And so I began to refine and really talk about those two words and as we relate it to the process. And part of that was, first, I wanted to pull back. And if you think about the gospel, and we wanted to get to a singular word that everybody can understand, that everybody relates to, it came to love, right? It's that overwhelming, unconditional, sacrificial love of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? If we understand love, right, and we understand that the Great Commission was to go, therefore, make disciples, but also the Great Commandment was how we do that. We love one another as we love ourselves, right? We love the Lord our God with all of our heart, mind, and soul, and we love others as we love ourselves. That process, I believe, it only takes place when the Holy Spirit has worked within us, right? And we have received the love of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? So that was kind of the beginning point. And then the lift idea was anywhere the gospel goes, right? Mark knows this well. On the mission field, we talk about gospel lift. Right. You go into a village that's never experienced the good news of Jesus Christ, and somebody comes to Christ, the whole village gets lifted. Marriages start getting restored. Right. The village comes to life. There's a gospel lift. But I think there's also a lift for us personally, right? The more we engage and encounter the process of being and making disciples, the more that we're lifted spiritually, personally, in our own walk, in our own enthusiasm, our own sense of joy, peace, excitement, right? And one of the things I really wanted to combat in this discipleship process was, you're living a boring Christian life. You're missing out. Right? Yeah. There's a lift available to you if you'll engage that takes place that, man, it becomes exciting. And I wanted the end goal, my vision was to see, hey, at some point down the road, man, we have a church and every day people are going, oh, you're not going to believe what God did this week. I saw this man who I thought would never come to Christ. His life has been transformed. God did this. We were praying about this miracle and they said, I'm cancer free, and God is moving and it just becomes everyday language for our church. That's the lift, right? Yeah. So what is the process to do that? And so very simply, I just took what we already have, right? What already existed, and just said, okay, think of it in a funnel, right? Our largest gatherings are things like worship conferences, the marriage conference, that's a big one. The outreach deals you do, special events. Those are open door. That's the front door of our church, right? That's the first entry point. There's a digital side to it. I totally get, and I would throw that in there as well. But for most people, it's engagement through one of our programs or our worship services, right? So that's our biggest group, if you think about it in group terms. Our ideal is we want to move people from bigger group to smaller group on a continual process, right? So the big group is those worship opportunities, big conferences. And then the hub, really the main piece of our church becomes then our community groups, which is our Sunday morning offerings that meet at all of our campuses. And I think some of yours meet on midweek. But those groups, the thing we wanted to express is that the first lift to a discipleship process is community. Mm-hmm. It's when you connect with like-minded believers who are in the same stage and age and season of life, and they're walking through the same, and you're doing life together. Mm-hmm. Lift begins to happen when you start experiencing these things of, I'm not alone.
Right.
Yeah.
They have some of the same struggles. I thought I was bad. This guy's way worse. I feel better, right?
They begin to feel normal.
And then when people start, in our community groups, we kind of say that there are four things we're going to provide, four pillars of our community group. We want lasting, deep community relationship, right?
Yep.
That's going to happen. We want sound biblical, relevant teaching. Yep. Obviously, we want that to happen. We want prayer for each other, right? Mm-hmm. We want to be praying for one another. We want prayer to be at the focus. But also, we have this element of what we call personal ministry or care. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And man, when you as a young pastor, used to be told all the time, people don't care what you know until they know you care. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we get people to understand it and the importance of community? The big part of that is that care element, that your community group is the person who's there for you when you are struggling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When you're sick, they're providing meal trains. They're calling you at the hospital. When you're, for young adults, when they're pregnant, they're having a baby shower for you. When somebody's getting married, they're the ones standing in your marriage and vowing to hold you accountable. And that becomes that personal care part of it. It's also the dissemination of information. It's also through the community group. We want to connect people. We want to get them in a community group because that's where we're going to disseminate information about the other ministries of our church. Yeah. So then there's also service opportunities that come in, grow groups, which we'll talk about here in a second. That's where they're being communicated to the people. And so I just recently talked to somebody who had been in a community group for several years, kept hearing several members of their class talk about going on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic. Mm-hmm. And then they said, we're thinking we may go this with a group from our class. We've never been on a mission trip.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, that mission trip, God may rock their world. There may be a lift they don't even expect.
Absolutely.
That's going to drive their class. They're going to come back on fire, and that's going to radically change that community and maybe even deepen them to say, hey, I may want to take another step and go deeper. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then we have this community group. That's the hub of all that we do. So we're pushing everybody into from our large group settings. We want everybody we can get into our community groups. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then from our community groups, we kind of have the next step down. We have grow groups and serve groups. They're just smaller components. A grow group is like our women's minister, Kristen Campbell, does a women's Bible study.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's great.
It's additional, extra offering.
It's an extra offering.
It's like men's Bible study on Tuesday.
Men's Bible study on Tuesday morning. Yeah. I do a Thursday morning breakfast.
Wisdom for marriage thing we did.
Wisdom for marriage. Yeah. Those are just... In addition, if you want to go deeper in this area, marriage or a study of a certain book sounds something you want to go to, they're going to go. It's going to be a little deeper, and you're also going to begin to engage with a different group of people. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, there's a different community.
More fellowship.
There's another fellowship. There's a little deeper, and then from that, and so you have these grow groups and these serve groups. Serve groups are just missional opportunities, like I've been hearing them talk about CASA for a long time. I'm a nurse. I may go check that out. Sure. I'm going to go out to CASA. Well, then you build a whole other community of CASA of nurses, doctors, dentists who are serving there, and then just volunteers who are doing the spiritual assessments.
Right.
And you start having a heart for the people who are coming to that clinic. That becomes your mission field. Yeah. That's a deeper step than just attending a community group on Sunday morning. Right. Does that make sense? And it deepens you. It fuels you. It motivates you. And then the end of that, the bottom of that funnel then is what we call lift groups. And that's kind of intentional personal discipleship with a sole focus of reproduction. Right?
It's like your one-on-one, one-on-two, one-on-three, that kind of thing.
Yeah, probably 1-4 at the most, but it's a small, intimate group where you're being vulnerable, you're being transparent, but you're also walking in an intentional, personal way to say, hey, we want to lift you up to a level to where you have a confidence that you can do this in somebody else's life. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. That there's somebody right now. I met with a guy this morning. He's brand new into it. And I said, I want to be very clear up front. My end goal is that a year from now, 18 months from now, 2 years from now, whatever, however long it takes.
Yeah.
You're going to be walking with guys just like I am with you right now.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
You're going to be leading them in this process because
good.
God's lifted you. If you are being lifted, it is contagious. It goes out and lives are being lifted, right? In your family, in your community, your neighborhood, your workplace.
Yeah.
They'll see it and it'll impact them.
Sure.
Yeah. And so that's the goal is I don't want to say it this way. Roger's already told me not to say this. Our goal, though, is I want to see as many people get through that lifted life,
Sure,
through those lift groups and a lifted life, and experience what it means to truly disciple someone.
Yeah.
Because when you become a disciple maker, there's just something different supernaturally that takes place in your life that you can't even explain. I've discipled lots of men. There's not one single one that I didn't benefit from walking in discipleship.
Yeah.
It's like going on a mission trip, right? People go on a mission trip. Oh, we're going to go help the poor people in there. And then they get there and go, well, that was probably more impactful for me than it was the kids in Ecuador, right? Or it was just as impactful.
Yeah.
And they come back and they're on fire. Same thing happens in discipleship. As we walk with people in discipleship, we start realizing just the energy and the excitement and the joy and passion it gives us. Yeah. And then we get the privilege of seeing how it makes a difference in the lives that we're walking with.
Right.
True.
Does that make sense? I've seen marriages restored, men overcome addictions and things like that, just walking through a discipleship process. So now, any questions from you guys as the campus pastors, as you hear that? What are your initial thoughts and feedback?
Yeah. Again, my missionary experience, my fear is always that discipleship to me is like prayer, that you never do it enough, but a lot of times you don't change. And so you talk about prayer, you talk about discipleship. I think the key is intentionality and priority. I learned a long time ago, you become what you celebrate. And if we as a campus or as campuses begin where we celebrate discipleship, new groups, where that's the top, then I believe we emulate that. As far as training, to me, it's got to be simple, reproducible, because we would have already been doing it if it was, quote, natural.
Yeah.
To deny yourself, take up your cross, follow the Lord is antithetic to the human condition. And so to me, that's, as far as what's a disciple, a disciple is someone who's an apprentice to a teacher, someone who follows. Yeah. And I often we adopted a couple of kids, a boy and a girl. And it's always funny because when my son is with me, invariably someone will say, well, I can tell he looks like you. But of course, there's no genetic DNA that's me. But somehow just growing up from the age of 9 on, he began to walk like me, some of his speech patterns. And so to me, that's what a disciple is. Yeah. Someone who models or patterns after their master.
Good. That's good. I agree wholeheartedly. I think it is, the terminology I use often is it's easy to instruct. It's hard to construct.
Sure.
Right. It's easy for me to tell you this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Even to point the passage you just talked, to die unto myself daily.
Yeah.
We all know that. We all say that.
Right.
What does that really mean?
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to actually walk out.
Very hard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is a reality. Right?
Yeah. My struggle, and I don't know the answer, so I'm just putting it out there. We live in such a busy culture. And so I love everything you're saying. Yeah. I support everything you're saying. Yeah. That's a lot for people to do.
Yeah.
You know, on top of what they already have to do. And so I think it's helpful to hear, and I think I heard you say this, Robbie, is like community group is where we want you. Like if we're going to boil it down to, I have only so many hours in a week to give, and I have 18 opportunities, where would you want me to invest that time?
Right. Yeah.
Community.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Wholeheartedly.
That's I think what we have to communicate to our people, but also not minimize the other ways to go deeper. And that's
what I was going to say. I was going to say, is everybody going to go all the way through the deal? Probably not.
Yeah.
Sure. But I will argue too, look, busyness is the greatest weapon of our enemy.
Amen.
In the United States of America.
Yeah. Yes.
We have to set a high bar and prioritize this with an importance.
Yeah.
Again, we can edit it later because Justin will take it off of this feed. But if they're only going to give me 1 week, 1 hour a week from their whole schedule, I tell them to go to a community.
Go to community group.
Sure. Yeah.
But there is a sense as I believe this, and this is my hope of the discipleship pathway, as they grow and the Spirit moves and they mature, they'll prioritize time.
Yes.
As God moves.
I agree with that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because they'll see value.
They'll see a value.
Time
And they'll have a
follows
desire.
value.
And they'll have a want because they're seeing the impact on the people around them's life and go, I want that.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us as a church, as we're talking about being, you used the word intentional.
Right.
What was that other good word you used? Intentionality and
simplicity and reproducibility. Yeah.
That intentionality of what you're leading us towards, man, I celebrate that so much. As a church, from the children's ministry to the youth ministry to every ministry that we do.
Yes.
We have to, I feel like, in order to lead people into these places, we all have to get on board and say, okay, in order for us to give community groups and discipleship the oomph that it needs, that we're called to as leaders to give it, we might need to decrease some of the other activities that we have going on the calendar because they're directly competing against what we're trying to accomplish. And that's hard work.
And Chris, to your point,
I don't know if that's the forum to say this in. I just said it.
No, it's beautiful. I think it's not only do we need to rethink what we do, it's also we need to rethink how we do it.
Agreed.
Or what we don't do.
Or what we don't
do.
Yeah.
Because one of the examples I use often is our children's minister, Jennifer Dennis. I want her to re-educate her mind to say, hey, I'm not looking for volunteers. I have a discipleship opportunity with a group of people who feel called to serve in the children's ministry.
Sure.
Everything is discipleship.
Everything is a discipleship opportunity. Yeah. Kathleen Yarbrough, who does our, we still call it Mercy to the City community group outreach stuff. We're not going to serve CASA or Agape or whatever just to take a group so they have a fun experience. It is a discipleship opportunity. How do we build it to where it's going to deepen somebody, challenge somebody, equip somebody in discipleship, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we got to think in terms that if it doesn't have a discipleship opportunity, is it something we need to be doing?
Is it a priority?
Is it a priority?
Yeah, totally. It's moving from that Cheesecake Factory menu to a curated,
and we're going to be the best
CityRise menu.
We're going to be at the best at 10 things.
They got 4 items on the menu.
Yeah, we can't do it all.
We're going to cut out
what we
12
have to
things because we're going to do 10 things really well.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense?
It absolutely.
And it's going to reframe even you guys, even preaching from the pulpit. It's going to be, hey, the application of this is not just so that you have more biblical knowledge.
Right.
Yeah. What do we do with it this week?
Moves us to, why are we pushing these things? Because we believe there's a pathway that God wants you to begin to walk on that's going to lead you to not only a deeper intimacy personally with Him, but also is going to become contagious to your kids, your family, your neighbor, your work, your coworkers, right? And it's living that out of an abundance in such a way that it's contagious, right? And it's, yes, is there a benefit for the people outside? Yes, but it's also what we want for for you, the individual, right?
I would add is also countercultural. That
Absolutely.
I believe the Western church understands discipleship is learning something. In fact, I'm old enough that
informational.
You had Sunday night church, and the hour before Sunday night church was discipleship.
Training union.
Well, that was training union. Then later it was called discipleship. And you went through a booklet, and you got a sticker. And I remember we had a grandmother in the church that had like 16 books with all the stickers in it, and she hadn't shared her faith yet. And that's something we learned overseas that it's just called obedience-based discipleship. That we would go through a session, and then the next session we come back and say, okay, the assignment was to share your testimony 3 times. Did you do it? Did you do it? And if they didn't do it, we do the same lesson again. Because if you go to the next lesson, you're basically saying, well, I don't really expect you to do it. We're going to move on. And so then all of a sudden you're 10 lessons in with disobedience 10 times. Well, what's the pattern you developed? Well, I'm learning stuff that I don't apply to my life. And somehow that makes me a disciple.
Yeah, and it is a tough balance because you want them to be, you do want them to be, and I'll agree with you. I'll back up and say, I just listened to a podcast and I agree with this guy 100%. I don't remember who it was, or I give him credit, but he basically said that in the American church, we have made knowledge our idol.
Exactly.
Yeah, being smart. Yeah.
Being biblically smart
right.
has become the goal.
It's
that idea of being
obedience.
spiritually obese.
Yeah. So,
right.
But it's
Never
interesting because, and I think it's what you're talking about, but then he transitioned, he says, but there's a difference between wisdom and knowledge.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wisdom is taking the knowledge you have and put it into application.
Yeah.
It's good.
When you begin to walk in application, you will grow exponentially in knowledge.
Right.
Right. So there's part of the transference is we got to stop emphasizing. This was another great lesson.
Right.
Yeah.
We chunk it up into what is the action step that is being communicated that we want to lead you to, not just because it's beneficial for us as a church. It is, but also because it will radically change your life. Right. To your example, Mark, I just recently had a conversation with a guy who went on his first mission trip. He was in his late 50s. He shared his faith for the very first time. He's been in our church for 30 something years. Yeah. Never shared his faith. Came back and he was lit up and like, why did I wait till I was 58 years old to be involved in evangelism? Because no one challenged him to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like how you started off earlier with this vision of the lifted life, that like where the satisfaction is, where the good stuff is when we're out there doing it, we're living out. It made me think about last night. I coached my third grader in basketball here. And what I've learned about third graders in basketball is they do not want to be on that bench. They want to be on that court. And even if it's sloppy and messy and they don't know what they're doing it at 100 miles an hour. And they just want to be, because that's where the fun is. That's, but like you said, sometimes in our church context, we, there's a lot of folks sitting on the bench and I don't say that in a critical way. I say it in a way to say that, like, man, out there living, putting into practice, that's where the life is. That's where the fun is. That's where the enjoyment is.
I think it goes back to what Mark was talking about is it is countercultural though, because we have to break some of the people's belief that church is something to attend.
Yeah. Because even difference to me between a discipleship group, when I preach at the end of my sermon, I'm going to say, okay, folks, this is how we apply it. Boom, boom, boom. But the next week, I'm not going to say, okay, last week I told y'all to do this, raise your hand.
Yeah.
But a small group accountability. Yeah. And of course, as the leader, you better be doing it. Yeah. If I'm going to call them out to share their testimony 3 times, I'm going to start out by saying, hey, Tuesday, I talked to this guy. And maybe some weeks I'll say, you know what, I only did it twice.
And it's even simpler than that. I mean, really, when I start walking with the guys in discipleship, it is, here's what I'm going to ask you to do for the next week. I want you to do a quiet time.
Right, exactly.
Every morning.
Read a chapter.
And I want you to shoot me a text.
Yeah.
Well, that's where I think
because all you guys aren't in the Word.
Yeah. That's where I think that lift group level, that bottom of the funnel, that fourth layer, that becomes really, really valuable, because the reality is, if you think about our community group level, some of our community groups are very big, right? Like in a room of 40, 50 people, you're not going to go around and like, hey, did you live it out this week? Did you share your faith? Did you read your Bible? So that lift group level, I think, is the real key, like driving more people into those type of intimate relationships, because that's where the real accountability and growth is going to occur, is at that level of 3 and 4 and 5,
Yeah. And I think it is I've been in ministry a long time and been a Christian a really long time. I still need accountability. I still need encouragement. I still need discipleship. I still need guys in my life today, just as much as I did 30 years ago. Right.
Yeah.
And I actually said it to this guy this morning. The older I get, the more depraved I realize I am.
Sure.
But also simpler my gospel gets. Yeah. Right. It becomes very easy, very simple, and getting people to that place of just a confidence and identity and a security of who they are, why they were created, God's purpose and will for their lives, and to see them start walking that out in a very tangible way. it's life changing, right?
Yeah.
It's for both for them and those around them.
Yeah.
But I'd go back to the basketball analogy. That's one of the challenges of discipleship, is because basketball in 40 minutes, you won or you lost, or you made a basket or you didn't. Discipleship, I think it was Eugene Peterson wrote the book. Was it Long Obedience in the
Long
Same
obedience
Direction?
in the same direction. Yeah.
So
good.
long and
That's what discipleship is.
Yeah.
And it's harder to celebrate in the sense of, well, we got 18 new groups. We got that it is just keeping the course, and it's not always attractive in the sense of you can't put up a banner or a thermometer.
And I think that's the real importance of getting people to that place of what it means to be a disciple before you're making disciples, because you will have to operate for a probably long period of time that no one knows you're doing it.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a lot of fanfare, and you may not get a lot of progress in the couple of guys you're sitting with.
It's all the roots that are going down that you can't see.
It's kind of like what you said
right,
about repeating the lesson. You know, we do a deal called Organics, and we talk about that first verse of the 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not." Well, there's a belief, a practice, and a result, right? From that verse, it says, He's our shepherd. Do we believe that He's the shepherd? Yes. Well, what does that make us? Sheep, right? What is the practice of a sheep to a shepherd?
Listen,
follow.
Yeah.
If I follow Him, the verse promises us we'll have no want, and that's not materialistic. If you actually look at it, it says you'll be without fear or stress or anxiety.
Yeah.
You'll have peace, right? There's a peace to it. So you look at a person and go, so what are the areas you're experiencing anxiety? Well, that's because you're wanting to shepherd that part of your life, right? You're not. There's a belief breakdown in there somewhere, and the guy go, "Oh, I know," right? He's not going to just go, "Oh yeah, okay, I'm going to change that." You got to walk with guys for a season before they get to a place of going, "Yeah, I recognize I'm operating out of a false identity that I adopted because of a bad father wound or abuse situation or whatever."
Yeah.
That's a long process. And it may go years that they don't.
And I think that's a reorientation of that concept that we've got to get back to, is this, we got to take the long view.
Yes.
We're such a microwave society.
Right.
You know, let me share the gospel with somebody so I can get it over with.
Yeah.
Like, that's the way I grew up. You know, let me share it. We're going on this deal. Let me get it over with.
Well,
And let me share it with somebody I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
it's a
instead
lot
of I don't
easier.
have
It's so much harder if it's my neighbor.
You know what I mean? And
It's a
so
lot easier. I'm
it's,
never going to see them. Yeah.
it's really taking this long view of walking with people. It's not about results.
Yeah.
It's really not. It's God controls the results.
Exactly.
We
They're in
don't.
His hand.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, that's not our job. Our job is to just be obedient, take care of ourselves, and then help take care of others. And God determines the wins, the hows, you know. And so to get in a process of that is really, really important.
And I think it's even reorienting just the mindset of people that church is not an hour on Sunday.
Yeah.
Or 2 hours on Sunday.
It's life together.
Church is
all week.
24/7.
Yeah.
You are the church.
You are.
Amen.
You go live that out outside in your community, and it'll be a difference maker.
Yeah.
But it is a slow, long process, and it is hard to celebrate. But I think that the more that we adopt it into our vernacular, I think first is part of it is we got to clearly define it that it is a goal.
Yeah.
Right. What is that? The saying? If you don't have a target, you'll hit it every time, or something like that, right? It's kind of that ideal is we have kind of adopted a what do you call it? Shotgun approach.
Right.
And I think we got to hone it into more of a sharpshooter approach to say this, Jesus' final words before leaving this earth was to make disciples. To go therefore make disciples, baptizing them in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them all that I've commanded you, right? There's a process that He left us with that says, now that's what the church is to go do.
Yeah.
And He wasn't talking about a building on Sunday morning for a couple of hours. He was talking about the people of Christ. As the church. That's what we're called to do.
It's good.
And that's reorienting a lot of people's mindset is that church is a couple hours on Sunday morning. I serve when they need me to in this capacity, and I've fulfilled my obligation.
Yeah.
Well, Jesus didn't say serve in children's ministry. He didn't say go It actually didn't say go evangelize people, right? It didn't say go to foreign countries and lead them to Christ. That's important. I'm not diminishing it. But that ought to be in addition to you walking with somebody in discipleship.
Right.
Yeah.
Your family, your kids, your neighbors. You're walking with somebody. And then in addition to that, I get to go to
Right.
wherever and share the gospel.
Yeah.
I guess what I would see as foundational is I kind of shy away from, okay, we're going to have an emphasis on discipleship because that means in 6 months we're going to have an emphasis on helping the poor. And then 6 months, we're going to have an emphasis on children's work. And then
an option of
right.
activity,
And in fact, as a missionary, many times I'd go to churches and they would have, associate pastor, worship pastor, missions pastor, and which is great in one sense, but then that's the department of your church.
Right.
Okay, we're going to do missions in this way. And my fear is if we treat discipleship, okay, that's part of what we do.
Absolutely.
Instead of being the foundation of all that we do. If we do missions from a discipleship foundation, it's going to be so much more effective.
Yeah,
if we do children's work, youth work, worship leadership.
Preach it.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what I'm wrestling with right now is because here's the reality in most churches in America. You talk discipleship and they go, yeah, we have a discipleship class.
Right.
6
we have
weeks
Sunday
long,
school.
and we have a certificate you can get.
Yeah.
And it's a part of what we do.
Right.
What I am proposing and what I am strongly trying to push through is, everything we do is discipleship. And in addition, we do it through mission. It's kind of like Mark is long-term missionary. It's kind of like when we used to have the mission offering once a year, and we highlight missionaries.
Right.
Well, we're doing missions. We're on mission 365 days a year.
Yeah. Good or bad.
Right. Well, it's why do we emphasize it for just 1 month a year? And part of that was intentionality to get resources. I totally get it. But we ought to think of it in terms of everything we do. Like Chris was talking about earlier, children's ministry is a discipleship opportunity for volunteers and for children.
I really like that.
Student ministry, young adults.
Yeah.
It is a mission field for young adults. The leaders you're raising up and the people in the class.
Yeah.
Right. There is a discipleship component that we want to deepen them so that they experience a lift and they are then lifting others in those environments.
I think that's really helpful leadership, to the overall mission, vision, values of the church as an organization, like to have this litmus test that asks the question, where is the discipleship opportunity in X activity and Y activity? Because it kind of helps you with your yeses and your nos, right? So we think through like, okay, in this program, this initiative, this class, that we want to do, where's the discipleship opportunity? I think, I've heard Paul Major mention many times as he talks about children's choir, he said, this is a discipleship opportunity.
Yes.
And I think that's the right approach. Like we're discipling them. So I think that's really helpful.
And it's a multi-level discipleship opportunity.
Sure.
It's a multiple level for the kids, the
workers,
parents, and those who are volunteering.
Yeah, all of it. Yeah.
I think that it would be helpful, and maybe this is what you're going to talk about too, Robbie. People need a definition of discipleship. I think there's some assumptions about what people think.
And how would you define it?
How would I define discipleship? It's pretty simple for me. Y'all probably add to it, make it better, but it's helping people take a next step in Jesus. So that could be they don't know him yet, but yet we're helping them to take one step closer.
Yeah.
Or they maybe have followed Jesus for 40 years and we're just helping them to grow one step deeper.
Yeah.
Trying to facilitate stuff. So that's where I come from. But you guys may have.
I like that because what I would have said, first round is just like it's following. That's a simple way, but that's exactly what you're saying. It's what's the next step as I follow Jesus.
Yeah. We talk about it often in a sense of it is a slow, steady, upward progress. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit misconceiving because a lot of these guys they'll have a slow and then they'll have this moment where they take exponential leaps and get very fired up and on. But
they could also nosedive.
But the overall trajectory is always going upward.
You hope.
And that's what we
hope.
That's what we see the apostles doing in Scripture, man. I mean, it's like their journey.
It's a roller coaster, right?
To me, that's like, thank God.
But you also saw,
Thank God, but they grew.
Later, you see Paul, and oftentimes he would say, imitate me.
Yeah.
As I imitate
There was
Christ.
a confidence
Yeah,
as
there
he
was.
was walking with Christ, and he's saying, hey, come go walk with me.
Yeah.
And do what I do
Yeah.
for a season, because in that, the Spirit's going to stir.
Yeah.
He's going to grow. He's going to do things in you to one day you can confidently say, hey, imitate me as I imitate Christ.
That's right. That's exactly
Robert, so there's something that's maybe a bit of new language that you are bringing in this, in the funnel and in the pathway that I think is going to be super helpful for CityRise is the idea of serve groups. I think giving language to that is so good, because if you think about it, the example I thought about is if I think about our band in our 11 o'clock service here, they can literally never go to community group because, of the time and they're rehearsing and all this. But I know like Jeff has them over to the house and, they have spiritual conversations and he lives life with them, cooks for them. And so that, I mean, I would call that a serve group, right?
Yeah.
And I think just giving language to that and like celebrating that and like identifying that space as a way to connect and grow is huge for us. Because I think we have a lot of that actually. Yeah. I think a lot of the departments within the staff even are serve groups essentially. And, and the more you're actually serving, the harder it is to engage in some of these, what we normally think of as our normal discipleship opportunities. And so I think actually identifying that, celebrating that, and maybe even giving a little bit more rails to it, it could be huge for us. I think it could really meet a need. I don't know. I mean, I haven't been here long enough to know if that's kind of been done before with that kind of clarity, but I think it's really good.
So the next step that I'm wrestling with, and I think you kind of set it up for the perfect leeway, is I'm going to challenge. I want us to challenge every ministry to develop within your ministry. What is your discipleship pathway in light of our church structure? In other words, student ministry.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of students who don't go to our worship service, but they go to a large group thing on, I don't know, Wednesday night.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. So what's their funnel look like?
What's your funnel?
That's good.
And how do you define it? And how do you measure it that you're succeeding at walking people through your pathway? Right. Kathleen needs to do that with Mercy to the City
volunteers,
ministry volunteers. Okay. With each of our partners, Agape and Freedom Alliance, and what are the opportunities? The large group is we're actually going out to minister to people, but what is their next step?
Right.
What is it that we're leading them to connect in the next step that's going to lead them to a deeper step? Even in mission trips, we get, I know, Ben, you lead a group to Africa. You take 15, I don't know, what do you take?
No, more like 8.
So in that 8, what is on that trip specifically, what are the opportunities, the pathway you say, okay, the 8 have signed up for this trip.
Yep.
What is the next step for that 8?
Absolutely.
And then what is the final hope of that 8?
Yeah. Big growth opportunities.
And really it reframes even the mindset of the hope is, right, you take 8, 2 years from now, one of those 8 are taking 8 to Africa.
Absolutely.
Own, right?
Yep.
They're leading
Absolutely.
the trip now. Mark, I know you're going to
Rwanda.
Yeah. Same thing, right?
Yep.
Hey, at
We're
some
talking
point,
to 2 people
you're raising up some people
for the
who
purpose
are
of being the next leader.
Yeah, I've got a couple of guys I think could lead the trip in 2 years.
And
for
so you
sure.
start framing like that. And I think even at Kathleen's level here locally, you guys start saying, okay, this same person's gone on a trip with me to free the captives multiple times.
Yeah.
Maybe God is stirring in this person that they want to lead that arm of our ministry because that's something they're passionate about. And I want to support them and love them and walk with them as they do that. Children's and youth gets pretty simple, but then you got things like, men's ministry, women's ministry. There's a pathway for a lot, women's ministry. I think it's in January. They have their big retreat.
Yeah.
That's her worship.
It's kind of the top of the funnel.
Top of the funnel.
Absolutely.
What is her next step? And I think it informs not only just discipleship, but I think it also can inform the other things we already naturally do. Like it's part of outreach. It's part of our assimilation. It becomes the DNA of who we are.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you start thinking in terms of, okay, I've created this great women's retreat. What is it that I want to connect those women into post-retreat that's going to eventually lead them into a community group, into the funnel, and into Lifted Life?
Yeah. And having that framework is so helpful because it actually begins to define for you how you plan events, and how you set the whole thing up. But you set it up with the next step in mind.
Hopefully,
you set it up with a follow-up step in mind.
Hopefully, I would argue that you set it up with 2 or 3 steps in mind.
Yeah.
Because, you guys know this, every event, you got people at different levels of the already in the process.
Some of them are already
Some
deeply
are already
connected,
mature believers who have attended for a long time. They just need a little kick to say, hey, you might be somebody who could lead a lift group.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You're ready to take on 3 or 4 other people and begin to walk with them, or 2 or 3 people and begin to walk with them. But all of that hinges on the fact that to do that, you got to know the people, you got to be in a relationship, and you got to have a process in place to say, this is what I want for you.
Mm-hmm.
This is why. Right.
I think given commonly shared language is so helpful because it takes time for language to catch. It's even like the rebranding Crosspoint CityRise Bel Air.
The crib.
Yeah, everybody, you catch people every day saying Crosspoint. Why? Because it just takes time for language to become 100% shared. And so I think just the more we talk about lifted life, the more we talk about, what is a community group, what is a grow group, what is a lift group, the more we talk about it, the more everybody catches on.
And we're kicking off a series at the beginning of the year called The Lifted Life, and it is an emphasis on this. But really, and I've told Roger this, we're going to have to just get in the practice of, if you will, beat the discipleship drum every Sunday.
Yep.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
Years.
Yep.
Absolutely.
It's going to take that kind of commitment for years, because it will be slow, and it does have it takes a while for people to grasp. I mean, we've had men walking in discipleship with other men intentionally, personally, in a small group for 5 years who still don't fully get what is it that you're asking me to do, right?
Yeah,
it takes a while.
And I think creating even space, from the platform, kind of like we do one big announcement each week. Hey, here's the thing coming up we want you to know about. Having space to just be able to say, hey, the most immediate step we want for, if you're new here, is we want to get you into a group. Here's how you do that.
Right.
Just saying that over and over
and
again. We want you in a group. We want you in a group.
All of our language. Because you give, we have an opportunity to do this ministry. But here's the reason we want those ministries to be done, is because there's a discipleship component that leads people to a deeper understanding, deeper relationship, and will radically change, inform their lives. You can be a part of that, through these ways, these means, these opportunities. Interestingly enough, I will say, I don't know how much time we're supposed to spend. We're probably getting
bring
close.
it in.
Yeah. But I will say, I'll throw this back out to you guys as the campus pastors, because you're on the front lines. You're the face of each of our campuses. You're out there doing it on a day-to-day deal. Surprisingly to me, there is a negative connotation within the church to discipleship.
What do you mean?
People believe that is kind of like when you say an evangelist. Well, that's a role of the pastors.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So it's
I want to walk with you.
You have to be a professional
because I want you
kinda,
to go, well, isn't that what y'all do?
Yeah.
That's y'all make disciples. I'm just a church member.
Yeah.
Okay,
and it's been surprising to me, the reluctance of people when you use the word discipleship or disciple. And so part of that is part of the reason I want to just flood it in the language from the pulpit often is really just to kind of overcome that initial hesitation that people already have a preconceived idea. Discipleship is for that professional Christian.
Yeah.
It's not for average Joe in the pew like me. And some of those people have sat in that pew for decades.
Yeah.
And never been stirred.
Again, context would be different. In our place, we would have 10% transfer, 90% by salvation. And so we are largely biblically illiterate, which isn't a good thing, but in some ways it's not a bad thing, because there isn't the baggage of, churchy words. We will have more,
what they don't know.
We will have more in our weeknight home groups combined, adults, than we'll have on Sunday morning.
That's beautiful.
Now, again, we want them to come on Sunday.
Sure.
But if they don't, we still want them to be fed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that becomes an entree. And we're always trying to start new groups. We started 3 groups before we had our first worship service. And part of it was symbolic, but part of it was to say, again, being a church planner for 30 years of my life, I used to always warn our church planners that a lot of guys were planning worship services. They weren't planning churches. So they would meet on Sunday, then they'd do it again the next Sunday. Then they'd do it again the next Sunday. In between those Sundays, there wasn't anything going on. And I've seen here in the States, not necessarily the church doesn't offer anything, but the people's mindset, okay, well, I came to church. What else do I need to do? I'll be back next week. And that's why they miss out on the blessing of the walk with the Lord and the walk in accountability. And we just finished a 6-week accountability emphasis where we got into groups of 3s and saw a lot of dividends. In fact, the ladies, I'd say, got jealous, but they did the same thing. And we had low 20s and then about 18 finished, both of them.
Wow.
And so a lot of life on life stuff.
That's great.
If I was going to have 30 seconds, I'll give them the elevator pitch. My first thing would say, hey, the first step we want you to take in this discipleship process is to get involved in a community group, because community is vital to your spiritual development, growth, maturity, and it's to your benefit too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then overall, as a journey, the lifted life is basically a life that is fully surrendered, fully empowered, fully loved, fully known, and then fully sent, right? So the Ephesians 3:14 through 21, right? A heart that is fully yielded. So there's a full surrender, that you would know the love of God, that there's a full, because I understand and receive the love of God, it is the overflow of that love that empowers me to love others as I love myself. It talks about being stirred by the Spirit in the church and outside the church. There's an ideal that you are fully empowered by the Holy Spirit, and that you're willing to be sent to go and do. I think overall that's the battle. That's the journey we're trying to take. We're pushing it through. Our hope is to really saturate our people with just the language and
love it,
the concepts and things like that. It'll take you guys helping me with just in the helping our own staff grasp it and communicate it well. I saw on here one of the questions was talking about an elevator pitch, and we do have to get it to a succinct of. I'm just asking you to take a journey.
The way I used to say this, and in the church planting world, and both in my own church, but then also training other planters, just super simple image, super simple language is we would just say, look, discipleship is the cake, everything else is the icing. If you don't have the cake, you just got icing. So discipleship is the cake. So I would say it on a Sunday in front of everybody. Hey guys, don't forget, get in a group this week. Remember, discipleship is the cake. Everything else is the icing, and people get that.
And likewise, think of it in the terms of a ladder. If you have Christ, you're on the ladder, and there's always a rung below you. Everybody can disciple somebody.
That's a good one too. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And the goal is that as you help that person take the next step, you're taking the next step.
Right.
And the more you do that, the higher you go. And that's the hope and the goal.